Welcome to the STABcast, a podcast dedicated to Star Wars Legion.
I can feel your anger.
Welcome, cadets and commanders, to the STABcast, the Sunsphere Tactical Attack Brigade's Legion podcast. I am Will. My only win is the bye. Heim, with Ryan, defender of the podcast, Honor Slowoski, and Ben, who actually got to play, Fowler. How are you guys doing tonight?
I'm doing fantastic.
I'm doing great.
This week on STABcast, battle reports from our Fun of the Tables, a continued look at Turn Zero, and much, much more.
So a couple weeks ago here in Knoxville, we had our Knoxville Short Notice Saturday event. We had a handful of guys come out, and we played the first of 3 recruitment kits that come in a cool little package, and we threw some dodge tokens on the table, and we see who could clamber to win them. Ben, you were our TO. How many players did we have come out?
We had 7 players at this event, which means, yes, we had 1 extra one, so we did have a couple buys, which means you know that I took one. This event, I'm playing the Empire list I built for the last event, but didn't play because I set it out. I had Vader with reflexes, saber throw and choke, 3 troopers with grappling gear, some extra troopers and DLTs, 1 snow trooper with an extra man and the flamers, and 1 snow trooper with nothing, 2 sets of bikes, no comms. Will, what were you playing today?
I was running a list. It's kind of an experiment. I didn't get much practice with it. I'm making excuses.
I was about to say, every time Will says experimental list, it means he didn't do great.
It's a great excuse. You should try it. It was Vader with throw and push, no reflexes, Veers with no upgrades, 3 trooper groups, no upgrades, 1 stormtrooper group with the HH-12 missile, 2 snow troopers with no upgrades, and 2 bikes with no upgrades. He was really just trying to get Imperials to 10 activations to see if it works, and as you heard in the intro, it didn't go well.
I was playing a variant on a list that I've been playing quite a bit, which is Luke Leia, Luke with push and reflexes, Leia with environmental gear, 4 sets of rebel troopers, 3 of them with an extra body, 1 of them with nothing, 2 sets of fleet troopers with the shotguns, environmental gear, as well as concussion grenades. And then I rounded the list out with 2 flamethrower ATRTs. A theme with my list tends to be double ATRT, double fleet trooper with 4 other supporting troopers, and double commander. I like things in sets of 2s. What can I say? Kicking off our battle reports, I got a grudge match with Tim, who I get to play quite a bit. We were playing recover supplies with rapid reinforcements on battle lines. We were playing on a mat that had line of sight blockers, but that aren't just big space blockers. There was a lot of terrain that we could interact with. And it made rapid reinforcements actually really quite interesting. It was a really tough turn 1 for me. And at one point during round 2, Tim looked at me and he just looked up with like big sad eyes and said, "I don't want to win this way. No, not like this," because he has yet to beat me. And he had gotten some really hot dice, rolling a bunch of natural crits on both my ATRTs to where they were pretty much ineffective. But then things kind of turned. He was playing a bit more of the shooty bang bang game while I was focusing more on grabbing boxes. I had some suppression go my way. He missed some key rally rolls. And I managed with my few extra activations to hold on to some boxes, having a lot of squads left with just 1 or 2 models left in them, and I managed to squeak out a win in round 5. Ben, how'd your round 1 go?
So we're playing at the head of the table. We'd set up an indoor forest map using Battle Kiwi's great terrain. Our buddy Scott brought it out for us. We had a shield tower at one end. We had a beautiful bunker built into a hill that Scott spent a lot of time on. It looked great. Had the AT-AT shuttle landing pad thing in the center, really tall. We had a great place to roll dice. And then every match that day had Long March. Every one of them. So it means we were marching from these great, beautiful pieces that couldn't do anything for us towards the center with very light cover, just the occasional block. It was a fantastic game. I played Jordan, who's a veteran of tabletop games, but it was his first live match in Legion. He's a listener to the podcast. In fact, he recognized our voices when he walked in, and I'd met Jordan at a couple other events he plays or a lot of the games here in Knoxville. Of course, he's running the 10 activation rebel list he found on the internet, perhaps through a podcast a lot like this one. Perhaps, one mentioned by Ryan Slowoski.
I don't know what you're talking about.
So he comes in and proceeds to just hot dice the bejesus out of me. We have a great battle. We really do. We're playing Long March, Breakthrough, and Limited Visibility. I've got bikes, which allow me to dart in and shoot pretty heavy fast. I advance towards the center. I'm going to put all my troops in there. He's got, I think, one set of fleet troopers because everything else is just regular rebel troopers. And I'm like, all right, fleet troopers are bad. I've looked at Ryan's list. I've played against him once, I think. But I watched Ryan beat lots of other people. I'm like, I got to kill the fleet trooper while I can. I put 7 different shots into these guys across 3 rounds. They never die. I just give up. Like, I just give up shooting them. Jordan is throwing white dice like they were red dice, and it's nothing but blocks and surges as far as the eye can see. Crazy town. So I quickly declared him an enemy of the podcast. When it finally came down to the last round, it is a 0-0 breakthrough. Neither of us made it, but he managed to destroy more of my full units than I could of his because those dice were just amazing. And I had good dice. I felt like I had good dice, but his block dice were just nutsy. So he won. Jordan put me down on the very first table, and I was quite sad. Will, how'd your first game go?
Pretty good. It was my best round of the day. I had the bye. I can attest to all that Ben's saying here. I spent a good time just watching this in horror, actually. Especially once we figured out it would be a 0-0 breakthrough, just on points.
That's funny.
It was just a slaughter. Just a slaughter.
So my game 2 was against the aforementioned Jordan. I have to go and get the podcast honor back. We can't let a newbie come in and beat up all the hosts. We end up playing intercept transmissions on hostile environment with major offensive, which is the corner deployment. So we're playing almost mirrorless. He's got a few different upgrades than I do. I have concussion grenades on my fleet troopers, and he opted to take those 10 points and have 1 flamethrower and 1 rotary cannon on his ATRT. I want to say, other than that, the lists were exactly mirrored with the exception of environmental gear. He puts them a few points somewhere else. But they were really close. 10 activation rebel versus 10 activation rebel. And with it being intercept transmissions where we have to move towards the center of the board to get in position pretty regularly just for the start of turn 2, I really think where the game swung was his decisions on turn 1. And we talked a little bit about this after. But he made what I think a lot of times is a rookie mistake. And luckily it's one that's pretty easily corrected. He waited for me to move my units up first, and then while I took double moves, he took a single move and a shot, putting out 1 suppression token, which would go away at the end of the round because I made sure to get my guys next to some terrain at the end of the round, and it gave him a army advantage. But when we started going into round 2, I was 1 action closer to the towers that we have to, be within range 1 of to score points. And at the end of turn 2 is scoring. And I managed to suppress most of his troopers down to make sure that I had more trooper leaders there. And then we kind of just split scores even back and forth. And we finished at the end of round 4 because time was called. And he just never been able to make up that deficit of me scoring that extra tower on the first scoring round. So it was a really close game. It was a really good game for him, only being at this point his, I guess, 3rd game of Legion. In a month, Jordan is going to be an absolute force to be reckoned with, especially if he keeps playing my lists. Will, you got to play a game. How'd it go?
This is when the downhill section started. I played Stab South's own Brett with his Rainbow Rebels, the very colorful squad. We were doing Long March, Limited Visibility, and Intercept Transmissions on a Tatooine mat that was made by Scott as well, who did the terrain for the Endor mat. Had some cool Star Wars-y buildings and walls and things like that. It was a fun mat. We traded pretty evenly, except round 1, my bikes kind of burst out of the Limited Visibility with aim tokens and dodge tokens, and they're going to try to put some wounds onto Luke. And it just didn't happen. After all the shooting was done, Luke was fine, and one of my bike groups had taken 2 wounds.
That deflect, man, when it happens.
I should have done 1 wound at least, come on. But on round 2, I got the advantage on scoring. I had 2 objectives to Brett's 1. But I kind of misread the intercept transmissions and thought, if the game ends round 5, we don't score because it's not round 6. but turns out you score the end of the game regardless of what round it is. So
Yep.
I was up 4-2 after round 4, thinking, the game's going to end because we're going to play round 5 and it won't matter. But instead, we scored on round 5, and I think at the end of that round, all I had were 2 Stormtrooper unit leaders left. Like Vader, Veers, everyone else was dead. And Brett actually ended up getting all 3 objectives that turn, which put him ahead by quite a bit. I think it was 8-4.
I remember watching Luke just stalk around the field, murdering solo guys just left and right.
So, with what you were saying, Will, would you have played the game differently if you had understood the objective card correctly? Or was that just kind of a happenstance did you play more aggressively thinking that last turn wouldn't matter?
I definitely played for the game to end on round 4 instead of round 5.
Okay.
So it was a mistake on my part.
Gotcha.
And Brett took advantage of that, where like I had Veers by himself on the objective to score and then the game end, but then instead Luke came over and hit him with his light stick. Stuff like that.
Well, like I said, if there's going to be a buy in the tournament, I'll always take the first one. I'll jump on that one. But yeah, Will took the first buy in this one, but that's because he was still working at the store, and so he wasn't quite off, and so he actually joined us later. So I took the second buy. I've taken the buy in plenty of other games. I've had no problems with it. You get to watch and talk, and I like the social aspect of this. But that 2-hour window in Legion is long. I took some great photos of D&D, of other board games people were playing. I watched a couple different miniatures games. I talked to the clerk at the store. I looked out the window for the rain. I mean, it was fun, but that 2 hours, it was long. It was a long 2 hours. So I took the buy. That was my game 2. Will, how was your game 3?
Right. So round 3, I also played Jordan to complete the STABcast new player gauntlet.
So if you guys come to Knoxville for the first time, you just get to play the 3 members of the STABcast over and over and over again. It's great. It's a lot of fun.
And then we declare you enemy of the podcast.
But yeah, we did Battle Lines, Breakthrough, and Clear Conditions. Tastes like vanilla. It was a destroyed city map, kind of some 40k terrain, some craters, a lot of open ground with terrain on either side, so it kind of turned into a no man's land. But I knew I'd have trouble dealing with his troops because I've had a few practice games with Ryan, just knowing that was his list. It was like, okay, I really need to kind of try to commit to one side and push through. Otherwise, if I try to do an even front, I'm just going to get wiped out evenly. So I deploy probably 3/4 of my list against maybe half of his, and even still, it just didn't go well. He did the same thing Ryan was talking about, where he waited for my guys to move up and then did a single move and shoot. But against my 4-man units, they kind of would end up getting wiped by that move, so it worked out better for him against me than against Ryan.
And I think to that point, that's a little bit more acceptable on Breakthrough as opposed to Intercept Transmissions, where you have to be at the middle of the map at the end of round 2.
I think I made a bit of an error in trying to move up a bit too early, which did let him get those basically attacks of opportunity, including one where he shot me through a window, and I'm still salty. I'm still salty, Jordan. But I got pushed back on both flanks, and we ended up playing the whole game through. We didn't run out of time, but at the end of round 6, he had 4 units in my deployment, and I had a single model on the table, Darth Vader, in his deployment zone, which kept it from being a shutout, which is nice, I guess.
I feel like Vader should count as 3 units. I mean, he is Lord Vader.
And if you get Vader speed 1 across the board, that should count for something.
That's true, yeah.
A special prize, an extra point.
I demand my special prize.
Your special prize you got at the beginning of the day, it was your buy.
Yeah, I got my 1 win.
Well, for my round 3, I got to play against Tim, who Ryan played at the very start of the day, and it was a tight game. He and I are both playing Imperials. It was one of those things where either one of us could have come out the winner. Hostile environment, capture supplies, battle lines. Tim's playing 5 troopers, Veers, a bike, and an ATST. We're on the farm map, which if you check out our Instagram's got a great little setup with some large grain silos kind of dividing the map into half. Nice wall that's blocking line of sight. We've got the center objective just to the left of the wall. We've got the left and right objective, and Tim puts a lot of his forces on my left. He's going to grab those 2 and head straight for the center. And seeing that, I put all of my forces on the right. I leave 2 guys out in the front just to kind of pepper him so he just can't take the third one without impunity there. It goes poorly from Tim's start. I wipe his bikes off pretty early. I've got Vader wiping out his one squad in ATST on the right-hand side of the map. Vader lives probably around longer than he should have, had some good defense dice at that point. I start peppering shots into the ATST, mostly because in most battles, you can kind of ignore the ATST. But I didn't need the ATST giving me the suppression tokens. That was really the biggest problem. And I have 2 sets of bikes, 2 sets of troopers, a snow trooper, and Vader taking shots at the ATST. Now, I'll go ahead and give Tim this. I did manage to have just 2 troopers roll 2 natural crits on white dice.
That's gross.
That's a thing that happened, and he deserves all the salt he would like to throw at my window. I would have killed him on the next turn, but it's definitely something that happened. So that was kind of gross. I wipe off that side of the board, and I start bringing my guys towards the center, and it's a death fight trying to grab that 3rd box. And we realize none of us are going to be able to get it. We're not going to be able to do it, and so it's going to come down to making the other guy drop his boxes. And so we've got to get some panic. So we start throwing suppression at everything we can. But I've got 2 bikes, and I've got 2 sets of troopers that are still left, able to throw some dice. And since his commander is only Veers, it just comes down to the final dice roll. Is if he rallies here, he wins. If he doesn't rally, then I win. And we hold, and our breaths are there, and he rolls it, and Tim comes right up blank. It was a tense fight to the very, very end. Got into the very last round. Could have been either way. It's a great game. It's a great game.
So game 3, I got to play Sunsphere South's own Brett. Good friend of mine. I feel like a bit of a protege / rival. He looked at me before our game and he says, I just want to win a tournament. Because we've been playing X-Wing with Brett for a long, long time. And Brett's a good guy. And this has to have been probably about the 5th or 6th time we've played. We've played some tabletop simulator games together. We've played just a lot of practice games together. And we end up on the Endor mat, which means we have to be playing Long March, Breakthrough, and Limited Visibility. Because Long March Breakthrough is dumb, especially with Rebel versus Rebel almost mirrored lists. This has probably been the craziest, zaniest, most upside down game of Legion that I've ever gotten to play. And I think at the end of the day, I think I can say that it didn't come down to dice. I think it came down to how we played turn 1. On turn 1, I double moved all my guys under the cover of limited visibility, while he moved and took dodge tokens. Not that he needed them, but just to kind of wait for me to come to him, because there was a bit more cover on the 3rd lines of the mat and not so much in the middle. So after round 1, where we're just kind of sizing each other up and letting the visibility clear and getting into position to where we can really start shooting, turn 2 happens, and all of the dice go Brett's way. He wipes a couple of my trooper groups nearly off the board. I want to say he takes me down 2 whole activations. What I trade instead is I get 4 damage onto his Leia, and then I get to throw unholy amounts of dice at his Luke. And he throws 13 blocks in a row. Without dodge tokens. Just natties. It was pretty gross. But then, karma is a cruel mistress. And after him going up a huge activation advantage, I managed to swing back by getting my flamers in position and my fleet troopers where they needed to be. And I think he took a couple shots in places that he shouldn't have. I think he was trying to finish off units. And instead of bringing the dice pool of my fleets down, I managed to win the ATRT battle. My Luke goes untouched and cleans house, and I go way up in the activation count. And the game went from, holy crap, I'm going to lose at the bottom of turn 3 going into turn 4, to at the start of turn 6, I think I'm up 3 activations. We call it there because I think everybody else was done. We still had some time, but we called it a table because all of my pieces were right where they needed to be, to where I could aim and flame with both my ATRTs. Luke had just used Son of Skywalker to clear off one of his ATRTs and another squad of troopers, and Leia was perfectly fine and healthy. And it was, I had a full up set of fleet troopers, Luke and ATRT. It was a rough game for both of us. It was the most back and forth game I've ever played, and I was fortunate that I got to come out on top. I think Brett made a couple of mistakes we talked about. but I don't necessarily blame them for it. I might have made them the same, but then the dice just went to crazy town for both of us, for absolutely both of us. And I got to claim victory at home. Felt good. Tend to have a curse where I can't win Knoxville events for whatever reason. And it was a fun day. Got to meet some new players, got to play with some old friends, and got to go home with some dodge tokens, which I do love for my very nimble rebels. And I got to beat Jordan because we can't have anybody beating all 3 members of the STABcast. That would be embarrassing, and then he'd have to host the show.
Enemy of the podcast. Watching you, Jordan. Watching you.
Let this be a lesson to new players. You can't just come in here and beat all 3. You can have 2, but not 3. That's where we draw the line.
So, Ryan, let me ask you, because you played your list a lot. Do you find yourself making it to turn 6?
Yes. Yeah, I do. We talked about this a little bit in our last episode. I like to get to turn 6 because I think of my list as a little bit like a diesel, because I've got so many short range options. Like, it takes me a while to rev up and get there, and I tend to be behind turns 1 and 2. But then once the gaps are closed and starting to really engage, and Luke is in position, and the flamers are where they need to be, and the fleet troopers are where they need to be, turn 3, I can really turn the gas on. And so I try to play the first 2 turns very quickly. I do think that 2 hours is enough as long as everybody knows what they're doing. 2 of my games did go to time out of my 3. I finished 1. We called 1 a little early, me and Brett's game, because we were just holding everybody else up and we knew how it was going to go. A couple scrappy squads can't take down full health Luke and 2 full health ATRTs and a full health fleet. And so we just called that one. But otherwise, I normally get to finish most of my games, or at least get the game to the point to where it's been decided, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. Continue our tradition of starting the game and creating our battlefield. Let's go and take a look at the cards that we have remaining until the new set comes out. This week's battle cards. Will, what do we got for our deployment?
So this week, our deployment is Long March.
We saw so much Long March.
Did we all get to play Long March at that tournament?
Yes.
Excellent.
We're all fresh and full of perspectives on it. Long March, it's long. It takes a while. Turns 1 and 2 can kind of go quickly, especially turn 1. Most people are just going to be moving. Like, I think when Ryan was playing Brett, like we just talked about, I heard him joking with Brett, like, could we just skip to turn 3 and deploy at the middle of the field?
I did ask. He said no.
I mean, Long March and limited visibility means you may not shoot until turn 3. Unless you've got bikes that are just zooming around.
Even once you get there, your front line's way shorter than I feel like most games end up having. Because it's just the width of the field instead of the length or a diagonal.
Right.
If you have a clear field, it does mean most everything can shoot most everything else. Because the length of your field is very short there. Honestly, Long March, I like it. It's fine. It makes map making, when you're building these terrain for these tables, much more difficult. Because I think I'd never actually played Long March. We joked about it, and we try to design maps where, it can fit all the deployment fields. But Long March just turns everything on its head, because you do start so far out and in the middle of the field, but then you can't shoot anybody because you're so far away. It just ends up being very strange. Every time I looked at Long March on all the things we played this past weekend, almost everything had like 3 main areas they were marching forward towards, which means you just had 3 death lanes.
Yeah, it tends to be a bit corridory. It tends to be like the ultimate sin for me, Long March. It tends to be boring. Like, this is a game, it should be exciting, it should be fun. And yeah, the first 2 turns, or at least the first turn, usually doesn't matter, and it turns into boring shootouts, because I think this is the deployment where it can turn into the most kind of a deathmatchy game, since, like Will was talking about, you meet on the width, which isn't as wide as the board is long. And so instead of having like a couple little flanks and micro skirmishes, it tends to be everything can shoot everything kind of where it needs to. And it tends to just be kind of silly. And I think moving after turn 2 matters a lot less.
Well, unless it's breakthrough.
Yeah, unless it's breakthrough. But even me and Brett's breakthrough game went to a table. Like, we just shot at each other because it was like, well, with suppression, I might not make it. So I better just blow him up to make sure he doesn't make it either. It tends to be boring, with at least the way that I like to play the game. I really do think there are going to be some players who like Long March. I think ATST lists like Long March. I think people who want to play the game where you just try to tie on points and blow more of your opponent up, you might want to favor Long March. Like Ben said, it is also a pain in the neck to try to build maps for, because, you know, the way we do it to save on setup time is we'll go in the night before our tournaments and set all of our tables up. And we try to keep it balanced for all the deployments. But Long March, it's a tough workaround, and I think it's kind of boring. This week for our objective, talking about key positions. I'm going to hold my tongue as long as I can on this one. Ben?
I just hate it, Ryan. It always seems like the worst thing to manage because you have to place the objective on a piece of terrain and everyone's terrain is different, which is the nice thing about the game. But it could mean this piece of terrain is 6 inches by 6 inches or is exactly 2 inches wide. And so now you have to fight over what part of the terrain counts or doesn't count. It can be so different from table to table because of the terrain pieces. I think it's kind of boring too. I think it just makes one side advance into the jaws of death, which for key positions, I understand, like thematically, and you know I love thematics when it comes to these kind of games. I get it. I just hate it.
Yeah, I've been on the receiving end of these two ranting about this. I've actually not played an 800-point game, key positions.
Lucky you.
But the placement objective seems pretty unfair. I'm just going to let Ryan take over from here. Free reign, go ahead.
All right. This is a bad objective. It is just downright bad. I don't think it was tested properly. I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's fun. If you're blue, you win. If you're red, you lose. That's just the end of the story. All the other objectives tend to have a few more components to them than just 3. Even recover supplies, where you get to choose where things go. One goes in the middle, and then there are restrictions on where things can go and where they can be placed, and both players get to influence an even amount of the battlefield. In key positions, there are no range restrictions except it can't be in your deployment zone. And so what tends to happen is the blue player picks 2 barricades or pieces of heavy cover that are right outside of their own deployment zone. They tend to park there, take aim and dodge tokens, and the red player just shrugs and says, well, I guess I have to go fight through your heavy cover to try to knock you off of at least one, if not both of them, while doing it with one less activation, because I have to have somebody babysitting my point. I also, just as a personal note, don't really like it because, like my complaint with Long March, it tends to favor a more deathmatch style, and I'm okay that we have objectives that favor that type of style. That's fine. I'm cool with that. I think if key positions had 5 pieces of terrain, or even 4, and one of them went in the middle and they had to be further away from deployment zones and further away from each other, and maybe some restrictions like you have to put them on area terrain or you have to put them on blocking terrain or something, so you just can't drop it on a tiny barricade and then hide behind it. And I think both players need to be able to place an even number of them to force people out onto the map. I think it's boring, I think it's unfun, and I think it's unfair. It is something in this game that I would actually really like to see errated. I can tell you when the priority supply box comes in, it's the first thing I'm taking out of my battle card deck. It's just bad. Am I alone in this?
You're not alone in this. I watched Tim take an ATST, set it on top of his barricade because it was literally right outside his deployment zone, and then he never moved it because it's an ATST sitting on the key position, throwing 1,000 dice at anything that walked his way. It looks beautiful for that one time he played it, but for the next hour and a half of game time, I can't do it.
Give us an even number of pieces of terrain. Give us some restrictions on where we can put it. Make it further away from your deployment zone. And make it more than just 3 pieces and an even number, and I'm happy.
Yeah, I mean, could you just fix it by making one go in the center and then you each get to place one?
Yeah. And if there's not a piece of terrain directly in the center, like both players can agree, or the TO or the judge can come over and pick a piece of terrain that is closest to the center.
I'm with you. When priority supplies comes out, it's gone. It'll never see the light of the day from a binder. I won't burn the card because I only have one, but it's not coming back out.
On the scale of throwing away to burning, we're just in the middle.
I'll put it in the binder. The binder is not throwing away yet. It's an intermediate step. Our final condition here is a hostile environment. And this is basically the one that, unless you're touching a piece of terrain, you do not remove your suppression at the end of the round like you normally do. And I love this thing. I almost always pick it. It's something I just particularly enjoy. And I love it because Luke and Vader's ability, when you're in an open field and no one's touching any terrain and you just throw on suppression, things get real bad. Losing those actions, the inability to walk to a piece of terrain because you only get to move once is fantastic because it means you're not shooting at me. It means you're not taking that objective. I love hostile environment. Now, it's been used against me. It does. And I have lost games in hostile environment because I didn't plan correctly. But I just love it. I love it.
Interesting you say that because I hate this one. All the things Ben said are fun and interesting when you're the Imperial player are just kind of frustrating in my experience. I feel like with an activation deficit that you can get controlled a lot easier. And Leia makes Rebels kind of immune to this condition. She can just pull 2 off of her friends.
Mm-hmm. Inspire 2.
Hey, everyone, we're not going to be suppressed. And the Imperials are like, we're kind of not suppressed. So it just doesn't work out well in my experience. I mean, I'm sure you could build around it like some sort of Vader and Veer's Castle of Fun where you just stand in one corner and say, don't come near me. But that doesn't work well for most objectives. So I just don't like this one. I think when the new cards come out, it's the one I'm pitching.
Ooh.
So in contrast to key positions where we think it's just a bad, poorly designed, poorly executed card that could be acceptable, it's just not. Is this just one you don't like, but it's still valid and interesting, and it just doesn't fit you? Or do you think it needs to be kind of reworked to be more fair?
No, I think it's just my personal issues with it.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah, I don't think it needs any design work or anything.
Yeah, kind of to what you said, like you're spot on for the Empire. Like as the Rebels tend to have 1, if not 2 more activations, it means suppression matters more to you and less to them because they have more things you need to suppress down and more things to suppress you with. I like hostile environment a lot. The thing that it does for me is it amplifies all your choices. It makes all of your choices matter so much more because you're probably getting overall less actions. So each action matters more because at the end of the day, each unit only gets 12, and that's if they're not suppressed. And so if you're only getting 8 activations or 8 actions a game with a unit of troopers, that means each of them make up a bigger portion of what it's contributing to the game. And I also think the order that you activate things shifts a lot with this condition. I think in most games, I want to go very early with my ATRTs to try to flame and get what I need to get done. But when Hostile Environment comes out, it changes the game up, and I need to go with all of my chump troopers who are going to get suppressed really, really easily, and it'll be hard to get rid of, and I need to get them where they need to go. I think it makes you really, more than any other condition, reevaluate the game state each round. I think it's a lot of fun. It's one of my favorite conditions, if not my favorite.
It's also one of those things that reminds you that there's an action that will let you clear suppression.
Yep.
You have to take it. Kind of pushes you back on that one. So if you want to see pictures of all the things that we do and all of our tournaments and our maps that we're talking about here, take a look at our Instagram, where I've got all the photos from the past tournaments, models, the beautiful things that we do. We love Brett, our beautiful rainbow player, and he has some crazy paint jobs, which you'll see on our Instagram. Routinely, I have had the title of Best Painted Model stolen from me. This time, it was Brett's vote. So he is still part of Sunsphere South, but now he's also my enemy. Check out our Instagram, all the stuff that we do. You see those beautiful painted sets from our friend of the show, Dustin Harvey, and his Jagged Brush Studios there. Take a look at our Instagram.
On our Instagram, did you put a photo of Brett's vote, of his ballot?
I did not, because I did not want to memorialize his vote against me.
It wasn't a vote for anyone else. It was just a vote that said not Ben. It was great.
It was glorious.
As we were tied, Brett's vote of not Ben counted as a negative point for me, and then I lost the tie. So I was down 1 vote.
Well, I think we should clarify. It was a tie between you and me. It was. So I would like to thank Brett for his cunning use of a negative vote. And now I at least won something at our tournament.
That's right.
This is true. You did get that.
So after you check out all of Ben's pictures from his 2-hour alone time, check out our Facebook, Twitter, rate us on iTunes. Have we worked out if we're on Spotify yet, or is that still pending?
We are on Spotify.
check us out there. All our links are going to be at STABcast for all the websites. So check us out. We really appreciate it.
We also have a Teespring shirt shop where you can grab some Sunsphere Tactical Attack Brigade shirts, as well as STABcast shirts, and also some Sunsphere Defense Fleet shirts if you want to support our X-Wing group. Anything we make on there goes directly to hosting costs. Also, if you want to check us out on Twitch, we are STABcast. We'd love a follow. I tend to stream from time to time. It's super infrequent. Tabletop simulator games, but if you just go on, find us, give us a follow, you'll get a notification whenever we go live. We would also love some Q&As to come through our email. It's probably the best way to get us your questions so we can get you some answers. swstabcast@gmail.com. Send us a line. We'd love to feature on the show and talk about it. You should also check out the Discord server, the Legion Discord. I hang out there when I can, when I'm at my computer. I usually have it up in my second window. The Invader League finished. We talked a little bit about that on our last episode, but they're getting ready to do another one in August after Gen Con, so go keep your eyes on it for a lot of fun. It was a blast the last season. I cannot wait to do it again. Also, Gen Con is soon to be upon us. If you're going to be at Gen Con, be sure to follow us on social media because we're going to be organizing a STABcast meetup with the players of the STABcast who can actually manage to win actual games. So if you want to hang out with us at Gen Con, I'll be playing Legion almost every day. Come say hi. We'll get some chicken wings at Scotty's. It'll be fun.
For our more local players, or those who'd like to travel, be sure to come by for our July tournament at Sci-Fi City. It's going to be Saturday, July 28th. Sign up starting at noon. It's going to be the second portion of our FFG prize kit. We're going to be giving away acrylic aim tokens and alt art push command cards. So they're really cool. They've got Arabesh writing on them. And they also kind of swap the faction. So I think push has snow troopers on it instead of the ATRT the normal one has. So check out the Stab Facebook page for event details. Also, communications from the allies in the Outer Rim. Priority Supplies is coming soon. It's probably out when this is out. Releases on July 12th. Gonna have some really cool cards in it. And some objective tokens and stuff.
I actually like the objectives. They look nice.
I do too. I've gotten to play the objective on Tabletop Simulator, and I think it's my favorite of the set. I can't wait to put it into my command or into my battle card deck and pull out key positions.
Yeah, and our next podcast, we'll definitely talk about those new battle cards, because I like them too. I like them.
I feel bad for the people that 3D printed their own moisture evaporators that are going to be like just the wrong size. Yep, so that they can't use them.
All right. It's early in the game, but the results tend to be in from the local events we're seeing, from the Invader League, some extent Adepticon. Guys, why are the Rebels winning everything? Are they broken? Are they just easier to pick up and play? Are they overpowered, undercosted? Are the Imperials just bad? What's going on with the Rebels? Will, you're the Imperial player. You should be full of salt. Why?
I'm at about 85% salt. I just think the way the Imperials tell you to play them isn't how you need to play to win the game right now. I think Imperials, their whole design standpoint says, hey, we're good at aiming, shooting, and hiding behind cover, and the Rebels will come to us with their dodge tokens and we'll shoot them and it'll be a great time. But you really can't afford to be that static in Legion, I feel like. And I think a lot of players struggle with that as kind of like a trap. They're designing their Imperials around what they feel like are the designed strengths, but they end up kind of playing into how Rebels can outmaneuver and out-activate you, and it just doesn't work out well for, I think, newer Imperial players. Snowtroopers are a step in the right direction from this, but as a Rebel player, and really as any player, can just kind of look at them and go, I need to suppress those. And you throw some dice at them, and then they go from super, super good to just kind of meh. That drop-off is pretty severe, so...
I think you hit on a big point, Will. The mindset. You see precise written on your Stormtrooper cards. You see it written on Fears. You see Vader's ability to, like, move and attack, and so it makes sense to spend an action to get an aim token. You know, we talked early on in the show, I want to say it was like episode 1 or 2, about aim versus dodge. But I really think, well, you said it right, it's a trap. The aim token, precise, it's such a low impact action. When a rebel takes a dodge token, most of their units, at least their infantry, get it for the whole round. And even if you don't have to ever use it and use the nimble keyword to get that dodge token back, it's at least there, and it's going to enforce some stress on your opponent's mindset, on their decision making. Like, well, I don't want to shoot that guy. He's got a dodge token, and he gets it back. It's not like I'm even going to burn it. Precise just gives you an extra reroll, and aiming with precise just gives you 3 dice. That's such a low impact. When you only get 12 actions in a perfect game where you're never suppressed, do you really want 1/12 of your thing to be re-rolling 3 dice? It's such a finite return on investment, while nimble has such a huge lasting effect.
Unless you're playing key positions, it seems, you have to move too much. I'm with Will. You're never static long enough to make that be the action that you want to choose. For me, playing both sides, I'm feeling the shortness of materials. I wanted to play both sides. I didn't want to buy 2 core sets because they're nice models in all the boxes. So I bought a core and then 1 of each additional box. So all these lists that says you want to have 6 troopers of either flavor, Imperial or Rebel, means I'm short 2. I just don't have them. I can't run 3 bikes. I can't run 3 ATRTs because of what I bought. So when I go to put together these lists, either Imperial or for troopers or for rebels, I feel the point drag. I feel it's like, I can't do this because I need this thing because I have to have this many models. And so that's a buying decision on my part. That's mostly me, but I still feel that drag because I don't have the models. I think with things coming out, in the future, I can feel it. There'll be more options for points for me to spend on. I'll have more models because I'll buy 1 of everything from here on out. But I'm feeling the drag. I played 2 tourneys with Rebels. I've played 2 as Imperials. And I just don't feel like I'm getting the bang out of my Imperials that I do with my Rebels.
Well, and I think that's something probably a lot of players started out with. They probably got a core set between them and one of their friends and then bought expansions to make up for it and maybe didn't buy enough. Especially with Imperials, the Stormtroopers have been on back order since the game released. We can't restock them, so a lot of players just don't have enough units.
So I know you two, you bought 2 cores and then flipped out the pieces, so you had 6 of each.
We had 4. He had extras, and then I bought Snowtroopers to fill the gap.
The other thing I think we have to consider, talking about lasting effects and diminishing returns, when we shift over from the core category to the support, ATRTs are probably one of the stronger units in the game right now. I think that'll change when we get the turrets and special forces come out. I think they are some really unique answers to ATRTs. And I don't necessarily think that the ATRT is much stronger than the bike because they come out to about the same point cost. I think the ATRT is a touch cheaper, but the ATRT, while it does break, its die pool never gets cut in half. When you take those first 3 wounds on a bike, you'll lose half your die pool, and then it becomes a whole lot less threatening. Unless when your ATRT breaks and you roll that surge and lose your weapon, it's still scary. And you still get its full potential until it falls apart and dies. I think that we always just need to remember to all praise be to the Holy Flame.
I see a lot more of Sharpshooter on the horizon. Leia has it, and so does Veers, but there's a lot more of it coming out. And those bikes are going to lose that cover awfully easy. And since they don't have armor, the bikes I think are going to get downgraded just a bit with the new units coming out. We had this debate before the show tonight. We went to the numbers calculator, and the calculations say that Imperials should be doing more damage than the Rebels. It does. We ran them 3, 4, 5 times, different variations, and it says they should be. I just don't feel it. And it could be confirmation bias. The psychological part of me says, I just don't feel it. I think Rebels have a lot higher dice variance. I think they tend to throw a lot more dice. I think they throw more dice than Stormtroopers do right now. And so when they don't hit, it's like, oh, look, okay, bounced off you, it was fine. But when they do hit, my lord, they hit like a truck. And so it feels like my Imperials are not doing quite the same damage.
So we've kind of talked about it. Rebels were the top 4. All the top 4 lists in the Invader League were Rebels. Most of the 800 points events that I've been to, Rebels have not only won the event, but been rounding out the top lists. Do we need divine intervention? Do we need a FAQ and FAQ? Do we need to get our Sharpies out and write some new words on cards? Because it is getting pretty bad when both Brett from Sunsphere South and Tim have a winning record against Will.
It's just Will's a bad player.
Oh, okay, got
it. No, I don't think there's divine intervention. I think we're at that point of the game where this is the meta as is right now. I'm a little worried about activation spam. Is it going to be 10 activations always? But I think right now it's the things that we have in front of us. I think when we get scout troopers, I think that's going to change things. I think the laser turrets are going to change things. The E-webs are going to change things. I think Boba Fett, because he's going to be only Imperial, is going to shift hard what we're seeing.
He's going to tear everything that's strong and Rebel apart.
I really think so. I worry about having Han as another commander option. It's going to split the Rebel field a little bit until we see what kind of shakes out of that. I think the changes are coming. So I don't think divine intervention at this point.
I think that it's not only the fact that new things are going to come out, but I think the way the new things interact with the old things. Right now, Rebels are able to get out so many more activations, but as the next 3 releases for both factions don't affect the core units, your troopers, your snows, your storms, your fleets, we're going to have to start taking our points away from those things and into these new supports and the turrets, into these new commanders and operatives. And I think where the Rebels are really getting their edges right now is in the ability to put out just more core units. When those aren't as valuable anymore, I think the meta is going to take a pretty hard shift.
Yeah, I'm with Ben, and to another extent, Ryan, I guess. I don't think we need FFG to come in and nerf the Rebels at this point, but right now, I think it's hard to pin it down to one single thing that makes the Rebels better. I think they have these stacking up minor advantages, like, the point value doesn't seem like much until you add on that Nimble is really a lot better than Precise, and Luke can kind of counter Vader a lot easier than Vader counters Luke. And, these things are kind of adding up to where Rebels are finishing a lot better. But like you guys have said, I think it's just an early game issue where there's not a lot of options right now. I think once the game kind of opens up, as we see with, in X-Wing looking back to Wave 1 and 2 when it was all 2 or 3 list types.
TIE Swarms.
All TIE Swarm all the time.
Yeah. Games evolve quite quickly at the beginning of them, so I think things are going to change.
Not only do games evolve, but players evolve. And I'm really anxious to see. I think we'll get some Imperial player, who knows, might be Will, comes out and breaks the faction wide open and starts doing something differently, and it just changes the way we approach the faction. I think the players are clever enough that they'll find a workaround for any deficit they have right now.
We're not putting enough targeting scopes on the stormtroopers for that Precise to be 4 dice.
That pains me.
Speaking of that pain, let's go now to the Imperial Corner. Will, what do you got for us tonight?
You got me there. Tonight, we are going to focus on the Dark Lord himself, Darth Vader. He's the icon of the Imperial list. I've seen like one list without Vader, and it was Tim's anti-Jedi list, I think he called it. Vader's here, he's slow and steady, and ready to be murdered by his son. I tried running him without reflex. He just doesn't do very well. You really need that reflex. Without it, people just kind of ignore him. If you want him to be this big, scary booga booga coming up the middle of the board to hunt the ATRTs and Leia, you need him to have that dodge token just so if a squad of troopers shoots at him, they don't deal 4 damage, which happened to me. It was awful.
I do remember one of my opponents going, wait, how did he get 2 dodge tokens?
That free dodge action if you're going to be in the thick of things. So yeah, you really need reflex and saber throw. They're both basically mandatory. Without saber throw, he's just kind of angrily shaking his stick at people. He's just too slow to not bring it. But that being said, don't use your throw against units in cover. It's a waste. Like, if they're in heavy cover, don't do it. Do something else. Out of his command cards, I think Master of Evil is the best. It can really change a game. I think Ben had a game where it panicked all his units off the board.
Just in that one-sided disarray, but yes.
I've seen it put 15 suppression tokens down. Like, it's gross.
Like, especially against Leia, when it does get her a lot closer to her limit than Luke, it can change things. But I've also seen it where nothing happens and then the rebels are like, sweet, some cover. So you need to really plan around it. Plan ahead when you're going to pop it. Make sure they're not just going to be like in a leadership bubble where it won't matter. As far as implacable, it's not hard to figure out. It's that turn you want to do that big, murder something and then murder something else. It's not quite as good as Son of Skywalker, I feel like, because you have to pray that you can draw his token when you need it for the second time, whereas Luke just gets to swing and swing again, which has its own issues.
But the nice thing about implacable is it gives you flexibility for that second action. It doesn't have to be an attack, and it doesn't have to be right away.
That's very true, yeah. It says you only get one action, but with Vader, that can be like 3 or 4 actions, especially if you haven't exhausted your cards yet. Like, I think implacable, his normal activation, you move, attack somebody, and then his implacable one, he moved, pulled somebody, got a free dodge with reflex, and then, he did that in the correct sequence to kill another unit with pull and reflex and all the things. Vader's a solid choice. I don't think I'll be leaving home without him. He's a good commander.
So speak to the great debate of our times, push versus choke on Vader. We talked about this like episode 1 or 2, but now that we've got more table time, what are you seeing?
I like push.
It's so good.
You can do some shenanigans with force push. Whether it's pulling a unit into you when you have your attack action, or if you just don't want to get shot at and you're like, hey, fleet troopers, come here for a second. And then they can hang out together for a round.
Yeah, even if you don't get a free attack with it, and this speaks to both Luke and Vader, any other future models that can take push, push allows you to manipulate the battlefield probably in the biggest way that we have right now. Being able to pull things not only in and out of cover, but Vader has an always-on shield to where if he's anywhere near a unit that is already activated, he can just pull them into him, and he's now in a melee and can't be shot.
The next turn he just slices and dices, and he does it again.
Yep.
And I think I've also used pull. It's push, but you're mostly pulling. I've used it to kind of get one of my units onto an objective when they'd already activated, because it doesn't specify enemy models. You can move your own guys. So you just throw that unit leader onto the objective like, that one, you idiot.
The other silly thing I've seen with it is you never put anything near a unit with push within a 1-move stick of the board edge, because you can just push them right off. And when you can push another commander off the board, a full health Luke, a full health Vader, just right off, and then it's a 300 or 200 point swing, it's crazy.
Yeah, didn't you watch like a TTS game where 2 Lukes were trying to push each other off the board?
Yep, you can watch that game on our VOD section on our Twitch channel. It was bananas.
I feel like I got to speak up for a choke over here, because it's nothing better than watching your opponent when you just choke out that shotgun or the Z6 guy. You're within range 1, that guy's dead. I'm going to worry about these troopers over here to my right, but just for the moment, that guy over there's dead. You got 1 unit leader you have running around on the table. Listen, come here, dead, snap, and then go fight somebody else.
I agree, but the utility that push gives you is just so much stronger.
This is true. You're not wrong about this. But force choke is 5 points cheaper.
It's true.
It is.
So if we're going to talk about Vader, I feel like we need to wander on down to the Rebel Cave. Ryan, what's going on with Luke?
Well, if we're in a Rebel Cave, he's probably hanging upside down being mauled by a Wampa. Luke is the Batman of the Rebels, man. He's not the commander we want, but he's the one we need. He doesn't fit with the way Rebels play. Rebels like to be nimble and hide and pop out and shoot and have really strong defense, and Luke likes to just go screaming into the night with his lightsaber raised high, just move, charge, attack, reflex, mind tricker, push. He doesn't fit, but he's such a necessary component to the Rebel list right now, because he's one of your most solid choices for just consistent damage output. With Pierce, he's their best option for sources of impact. I keep trying to take him out of my list and putting in something else, but I just can't. He doesn't have as much health as Vader, although he is faster. He doesn't have the unlimited bravery. He doesn't have as good of dice. He's got just okay command cards. Son of Skywalker is really kind of blasé. It's really strong, it's really powerful, but it doesn't have that synergy that you really expect from like what Rebels are doing, especially when you stack him up against Leia. His 2 card, My Allies the Force, just gives out dodge tokens. It's kind of just meh. And Return of the Jedi, everyone forgets that there's a second sentence there, and they just give Luke a dodge token and then forget to remove suppression when he activates, or at least I always do. His cards are just kind of there. They're not necessarily amazing, and they're not bad, but just like everything else about Luke, they're just there. He hits less than Vader, his counterpart. He's got less health. His cards aren't even, I think, as good as Vader, and they're definitely not as good as Leia cards. But here's where Luke really shines. He has no downside. He's speed 2. He's got the mobility of leap. He's got the mobility of push if you need it. He's got cards that are just good enough to get you out of some sticky situations that don't necessarily just apply to Luke. Like a lot of times you can play Luke's cards and order other things other than Luke with My Allies the Force. He's got no downside. He doesn't fit with the Rebel list, but somehow he still always makes it in, and he always has a high impact. He's just an all-around really good commander.
I mean, if you're not going against Vader, those 6 black dice are fantastic for just about anything else.
Yep.
Squad of troopers and an enemy ATRT and ATST if you're in the right spots.
But while Vader can kill a whole squad of troopers with one swing, Luke can't. Luke is probably going to get 3 damage through on an average roll, even though he's got the Pierce 2.
I mean, I've seen Luke do great and terrible things like mow down troopers and run behind an ATST and make it have a really bad time. But I've also seen him just flail around and fall over. In my game against Jordan, we talked about earlier, his Luke ran up into a squad. Another squad came around and punched Luke in the back of the head for 5 damage. He was just like, didn't feel like blocking that one. Or, like when I played Brett, he blocks everything and reflects 2 back and he's laughing at you. So he can be one or the other.
But he's got no glaring weakness, while Vader's got his slowness and his predictability, I think. I think you kind of always know where Vader's going to be. You don't tend to pull too many surprises with him. So Vader's definitely, I think, like a stronger piece, but Luke has got flexibility and no real downside to him.
I think as far as his cards, you're just spoiled by having Leia.
Sure, she's got the best command cards in the game, and I think it'll be a long time before we see her usefulness get overtaken by somebody else's cards.
So if he doesn't play to the Rebel style, does that mean you replace him the moment Han Solo comes out? Because Han Solo's that I'm going to pop up out of cover, I'm going to shoot a dozen things, I'm going to hide over here.
I think he plays different, and I think Han will have a place. But Han's downfall is, once again, kind of one of Luke's strong points. Luke can throw 6 black dice at one target. Han's got Pierce 2 on 2 red dice that surge, which is really cool, but still, it's only 2 dice. Even though you get to attack twice, it has to be different targets. I think I'm definitely going to try the Han Leia list when Han drops. I have a sneaking suspicion Luke will stay in my list to deal with ATRTs, to deal with Vader, to deal with like whatever one big threat you need to point Luke at. He's perfectly kitted with leap and charge and Son of Skywalker over the course of 2 or 3 turns to whatever you need to get that advantage, whatever activation you need to get off the board or tie up. Luke's your guy to do it in a way that I don't think Han can.
I can dig it. So for our last segment tonight, we always go down to the unaligned systems. And this week, we're going to talk about map features. I'm going to talk about cover, heavy cover versus light cover. And what I mean by that is designing the table. FFG gives you a list, and if you go look at the rules, it's like if it looks like this, it gives you this kind of cover. And if it looks like that, it gives you this kind of cover. And it's extensive. I would recommend to you when you're trying to put together tables to play on, make sure that you have balance there. Too many tables that I've seen, too many players, they like to declare everything is heavy cover. Oh, look, it's a wall. It's heavy cover. Hey, look, that tree is big and oaken, so it's heavy cover. And what that does, I think it slows your game down, honestly, in part because pieces aren't dying as they probably should. Part of the reason is people are printing awesome looking 3D terrain Star Wars, and they are great and they look beautiful, but a lot of it's the heavy stone wall variety. And so too much heavy cover means longer games. It means that suppression in the form of cover doesn't really matter because you're already getting 2 cover, and suppression can only increase you to 1 to a limit of 2. It just means that units tend to move from cover to cover. I zig here, I zag there, I zig here, and so you advance slowly across the map. Like Ryan said, the real sin is being boring. And so it can make games feel slow and samey, and a nice mix of cover. Give it the light, give it the heavy, have a balance there. Have difficult terrain, I think.
I think that's the one that's always underrepresented, is difficult terrain. It makes the way the objective nature of the game come out and play totally differently if there's difficult terrain.
Snowtroopers movement, I guess they get the attack at the end of it, but it doesn't mean a whole lot if all the terrain is the same and other guys can just go sprinting towards targets. But if everyone else is slowed down as well, then that one forward isn't a bad thing. That mix of heavy cover and light, making sure that you have both, it'll make your games more fun. It'll make them more tactical. It'll make you have to make different decisions. If you haven't created light terrain or light cover terrain, you can do things like our indoor map. Go look at the photos. Scott literally glued 3 twigs that he found in his backyard to a nice little cardboard piece and then painted it green and mossed it up a little bit. But they're great little light cover barricades. Very small, but they definitely give you a different feel for the game. So when you're making yours, we really feel go for that balance, guys.
Yeah, and not just, I know the rules say if it obscures so much of the model, it should be light versus heavy cover. One of the guidelines I've also been looking at and that I found I really like is if it's something that's designed like a barricade or a wall, if it's designed to be a fortification, it should be heavy cover. If it's something incidental like some toppled over boxes or debris or woods that's not designed specifically to be a fortification, it should be light. I'd love to hear you listeners if you guys think that's a good guideline. I know it's not the rules guideline, but when you're making your own terrain, trying to make light and heavy cover fit those dimensions could be really helpful to players.
I mean, you watch all those action movies and everyone's always shooting at all the boxes you see in a warehouse and no one ever takes a real bullet. But those things are made out of wood. I mean, even when you shoot metal things, they're not, unless they're all made out of steel. Take a look at that balance there. It's a more fun game, I tell you.
Well, guys, I think that is a show. I want to thank everyone for stopping by and listening to the STABcast. We do this for you guys. I hope you guys are enjoying the show. We're sorry for the long, extended breaks, but we're trying to get better at it. Life's been busy. Special thanks to our producer, John Michael Gorman. And until next time, I'm Ryan Slawowski, reminding me you can't beat the whole cast, Jordan.
I'm Will Heim. So many games, so little time.
And I'm Ben Fowler, and I'm watching you, enemies of the podcast. I'm watching you.
Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Ben just wants to be the guy from the start of the Clone Wars cartoons. That's all Ben wants in this world. Previously on STABcast, Will loses games. Ben doesn't play games. Ryan traveled somewhere.